Story 1. At Target, we have a code yellow for missing children. The whole team drops what they are doing and helps. Usually the child is found within minutes. One slow night, a missing boy of 10 could not be found. The parent was increasingly frantic. I asked, would he have gone to the car on his own? That question caused the parent to scream at me. They insisted he would never do that he had been kidnapped, and accused me of not taking the situation seriously. He had gone out to the car on his own. Story 2. At Best Buy, a woman comes in with a 10% off coupon and asks how much it will take off an $80 antenna. I explain that it is $8. She is surprised and angrily chooses the $50 antenna. While I ring her up, she asks why the antenna costs $45. When I explain how 10% off works, she says she thought I had said $8. Story 3. I once accidentally locked a pregnant woman in the store while I went on break. I was working alone in the mall and we had just had a rush. Once everyone cleared out, I locked the gate to take my dinner break. 15 minutes later, I returned and found a security guard trying to get her out. Apparently, she had been in the fitting rooms and I had not noticed. She was understandably angry and said she would complain to corporate. I called my manager after she left to own up to my mistake before the customer complained. Later, the customer called me, having calmed down, and said she would not report me and asked me to be more careful. My manager fired me the next day because I had admitted the mistake. Story 4. I worked customer service at a well-known superstore. A few times I had moments of complete mental shutdown at some of the things people tried to pull. The most memorable incident happened after a break. I would walk through the clothing areas to avoid customers. Around a corner, I bumped into a woman in the shoe aisle with an armful of boxes. I helped her pick up the boxes she had dropped and returned to the service counter. About 3 minutes later, the same woman walked up, put the boxes on the counter, and said she wanted to return them. I stopped and stared. I told her I had just seen her bring them in from the floor. She repeated that she wanted to return them. I did not get paid enough to argue, so I keyed in the code for a manager and processed the return for her, about $200 on a gift card. The manager and loss prevention intercepted her before she made it out the door. Another time, 2 men came in to pick up a MoneyGram. One showed a California license, so I asked what he was doing all the way in Iowa. He said he was on the run from the law. I laughed and assumed he was joking. 20 minutes later, a man in a Hawaiian shirt and cargo shorts cut to the front of the line, put a badge on the counter, and said he was a United States Marshal. I told him I thought the other man had been joking about being on the run, and the marshal responded, "He actually told you that?" They pulled me aside to speak with the store manager so he could inform the woman that they would be arresting the man as soon as he left the store. I asked if I could watch, and the marshal said, "Sure, why not?" The store manager told me to get back to work, so I did not get to see it happen. Story 5. Many years ago, I worked retail at a Sam Goody's record store and was training a young woman at the cash register. She was very quiet and shy. It was her first job and she was very nervous. An older gentleman came to the counter with a cassette tape he had been looking for quite some time and was very excited to find it. In his excitement, his dentures popped out of his mouth, bounced across the counter, and struck the trainee at the waist. She let out a screech, threw her hands up, and jumped back about 5 feet. He exclaimed, "Ah, shit," reached across the counter, grabbed his dentures, and popped them back in. The whole event took about 3 seconds. It was hilarious, but the young woman was shaking with disbelief. Story 6. My first job other than babysitting or casual household labor as a teenager was at an antique store. Mostly I came in after school to dust and vacuum, help with heavy lifting, and so on. If the owner had an errand, I was fully in charge, which made it a quite nice job. One afternoon, a lady came in to shop. She brought her notebook and borrowed my measuring tape when she found a dining room table that suited her style. "I would like to order this table, but 4 inches longer." I was taken aback. "Madam, we are not sourcing our European antiques from a workshop, you know? I can refer you to someone who could build a reasonable facsimile to your specifications, but there is literally no way for me to order what you want." She threw an absolute fit. Apparently she called my boss the next day. I do not know exactly what was said on the call, but $20 was slipped into my hand, the way grandmothers do it when I got to work that afternoon. Baby, you earned this for putting up with that old bitch. And $20 was real money in 1985. Story 7. Two women were conducting a bold shoplifting spree. City police stood at every store exit, waiting for them to leave the premises, while store security tracked them through the store. We were instructed to leave them alone if they entered our area. Sure enough, they came into my area. One woman pushed a stroller with a little boy of about 2 years in it. The other pushed an old-fashioned baby carriage with a blanket thrown over it. Later, someone asked about the baby and she said it had breathing problems and needed privacy. They shopped all 3 floors, filling the carriage, stuffing the stroller, and hiding merchandise in girdles under their clothes. They finally attempted to return to their car with more than $5,000 of merchandise and were stopped by police. Rumor had it they even had 16 pairs of earrings stuffed into their underpants. The baby with breathing problems turned out to be a plastic doll. Story 8. I worked at a Ross clothing store in high school. At closing time, I smelled something foul and started tracking it down. Someone had gone into the middle of the long pants rack and taken a giant dump. I told my boss, who asked me to clean it up. I told him that I was a minor and that it was against the rules of my work permit. I had no idea if that was true, but he believed me and left a note for the cleaning crew to clean it up. I was once out at a bar with some coworkers about 6 years ago. The single guy in the group started chatting up some women at the bar. I overheard one of them say she worked for Ross headquarters, and I couldn't wait to tell her my story. I probably ruined my coworker's chances, though. Story 9. Not me, but a story from my sister, who is not on Reddit. She worked at a craft store for her first job out of high school. One day a bird got into the store. No one could catch it. It always flew away and perched on a high shelf out of reach. It stayed there for a couple of days until it became too weak to fly very high. My sister was finally able to approach it and offered it water. It drank from a bottle cap. She gently put it in a small cardboard box so it could rest and regain its strength before release. She left the box in the break room and wrote on it, "Do not open. Bird inside." Later that day, while they were in the break room, one of her coworkers walked in and opened the box, releasing the bird again. My sister asked why she had opened it. The coworker said she thought it was a prank. Thankfully, the bird remained confined to the break room. My sister caught it again, and she immediately released it outside. Flew away. "Do not open. Bird inside" became a running joke among her friends and coworkers. People sent emails with "do not open" attachments that contained goofy bird pictures or animated images. They left actual boxes labeled "do not open" that contained stuffed bird toys or bird figurines. She left that job a few months later, but she made an impression. Story 10. In college, I worked at a locally owned dollar store. We had no public restroom, but there was a McDonald's across the street that we always directed people to. One night, an elderly woman came in and asked if we had a restroom. I told her no and said the McDonald's across the street did. She said okay and walked into one of the aisles. I returned to my work, and about a minute later she ran out as if her hair were on fire. I checked that aisle and found that she had urinated on our carpeted floor. Story 11. A woman came in disgusted at the state of the store. She was on her hands and knees looking under the racking. She left and came back with plastic bags, gloves, a mask, and cooking tongs, and she started pulling dust bunnies out from under the permanent racking. She asked for a broom, which I politely provided. At the end of the day, I walked her out and thanked her for bringing this to our attention. I never saw her again. The manager called me an asshole for allowing her to carry on like that. She was not bothering anyone and seemed calmer the more she did it. The whole thing went on for about 3 hours. Story 12. We had an employee whose daughter had died. We sent her flowers, gave her time off, and told her to come back when she was ready. She returned a few weeks later working reduced hours with a support person by her side. She was soon fired for allowing the support person to use the services for free. A couple of months later, she came in as a customer, and her daughter, whom she had said had died, was sitting in the car playing on an iPad. We confronted her immediately. It was very awkward. Story 13. I started working when my store was very understaffed. It was so understaffed that the managers were doing cashier work. Once during my shift, I had to use the restroom. While I was in there, a woman got into a snit with the manager at the register. I came out to catch the tail end of the argument. Important to note, managers and cashiers wore different colored shirts, and that day it was just me and a bunch of managers. I came out from the back wearing a shirt that was a different color from everyone else at the counter, and the woman locked on to me. She started lecturing me, a cashier, about keeping my employees in line and making sure they respected customers. She told me to discipline my managers, in particular the manager she had been arguing with. When she ran out of steam, she left in a huff. I looked at my boss and he looked at me. She thought I was the manager. We both burst out laughing. The woman came back inside, screaming that we were making a joke of her. We de-escalated the situation, I apologized, and she left. I never forgot that moment. Story 14. While I was scanning groceries, I heard a loud commotion. A shopping cart had collided with the service desk and two people were rushing out of the store. My manager came over shaking her head, and I could not help but ask what had happened. Apparently someone had stolen a display model of a microwave and tried to return it, claiming they had bought a faulty unit but had no receipt or box. My manager, who had heard about the theft earlier, noticed that the display had no cord and was unusually light, so she asked them directly if they were the ones who stole it. They stormed out of the store quickly. Story 15. I worked at a pet store when a man brought in a dead fish and demanded that I, a 17-year-old, tell him how it died. A bystander rescued me by asking if we had a fish autopsy kit. That was enough to get him to leave me alone. Story 16. I worked at a liquor store. A man came in so drunk when he arrived that he fell out of his lifted truck and bashed his face open on the curb. A customer ran in saying someone was bleeding in the parking lot. So my manager and I went out to check. He was absolutely hammered and had no idea how he had managed to drive there. After getting blood on me and my manager, he said he wanted to sleep it off in his car at noon on a Saturday in 95 degrees Fahrenheit. He was arrested. One more story. The gas station next to us was robbed. This was not the usual holdup. It was an inside job. They came at 3 in the morning with a saw, cut out the back wall where the safe was bolted, attached the safe to a truck, yanked it out and drove off. As far as I know, it was never solved. Story 17. I worked at Walmart in the auto center. One day, I was pulled into the manager's office and told I was being written up for working on my own car. I hadn't, so I argued with them. It turned out I had worked on a customer's car belonging to another man with the exact same name as me. Story 18. 20 years ago, I was working at Walmart when someone asked me to hold a ladder so they could change the pricing on a sign that was suspended over the photo center. As he went to change a number, the hook or whatever was holding it up let go. The entire sign, made of heavy metal and plastic, smashed into my face. Somehow missed my nose. I was left with an inch-long gash above my upper lip and a tear on the right side of my nose where it was almost detached. I have scars now. The human resources person asked me to come in a few days later to sign paperwork so I could return to work when I was better. It turned out to be a return-to-work form. They bait and switched me and had me back working several days later with stitches still in my face and my lip swollen like a golf ball. Fuck Walmart. Story 19. While working at a sports bar and restaurant, there was a small staff party and the boss ended up biting an employee's earlobe off. We found the earlobe outside the next day with the earrings still in it and gave it to the police. Story 20. I worked at a retail store in the mall during a winter break in college. The store was known for selling bachelorette party items and novelties for dorm rooms. The company had recently been acquired by a larger corporation and changed its inventory system. Whenever a product was sold, the system automatically ordered for more of the same item. The problem was that they had a sale on lava lamps just before Thanksgiving. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, we had lava lamps stacked from floor to ceiling and in the back room. We did not want them in the store or to sell anymore. I had to return to college after the break, so I am not sure if or when the inventory system was fixed or what they ended up doing with hundreds of lava lamps. Story 21. I work at Subway, the fast food chain. My store operates on a military base, so we do 3 to 6 times more business than an average Subway on any given day. Our lunch rush might be 150 sandwiches in the peak hour, whereas a typical store might do 35 to 60 depending on the location. A few months ago, a man came in just before the lunch rush and began his order while it was still slow. After completing it, he ordered another sandwich, then another, then another. The line began to form. He reached sandwich number 13. By that point, the entire store was full of people waiting, more than 50 in a theme park-style queue, and all 13 sandwiches were lined up on the cutting boards. His 14th was his last. When he finished that, he moved to the vegetable station and had no idea what he wanted on any of them. Each one was for a different person. He was a somewhat challenged individual. In this case, that meant constantly trailing off and getting distracted throughout the ordering process, which significantly extended the time. After multiple text and phone call sessions and some serious study of his disorganized order sheet, he managed to complete the vegetables. The line was out the door by this point. He came to the front where we were about halfway through bagging his sandwiches, then angrily told us that each individual name had to be written on the stickers. Our numbers 1 through 14 were not enough. I cannot remember any specific names, but each was an extremely unusual nickname that would never appear on a birth certificate. I think one may have been Smiley. Once that was finally done, he approached the register. I am not joking. He pulled out a rubber-banded stack of credit cards as thick as a deck of playing cards and informed us that he intended to pay for each sandwich individually, one per card. They were not in the order he had placed them. Ultimately, this cost us a lot of business in the form of customers walking out, and it took about 30 minutes to get him through the system. Our lunch rush was a nightmare because we were so backed up and never had a fair chance to get started. Do not do this. Every aspect of this could and should have been handled better. He should have had everything written in order. He should have informed us of the quantity up front. He should have had the vegetables written out properly. He should have numbered the sandwiches on his paper so we did not need names. He should have paid with one card and had everyone PayPal him. It is not fair to put all of that on us and wreck the next 4 hours of 7 people's shifts because you are too lazy to plan. End of rant. Story 22. I work as an optician, and quite recently I had a client come in for a checkup at the optometrist for vision. His vision was about -3.5 and -8. Those who wear glasses know that this is bad news. He shrugged and said that he would manage, that he had been working as a truck driver with that vision, and that he sees well. He does not wear glasses. My colleagues and I thought about asking for his work schedule so we would know on which days we should not leave the house. Story 23. A customer once refused to buy granola from me because I am not vegan. The granola was vegan. I, the salesperson who did not make it, was not. They said it conflicted with their morals. Story 24. I worked at Aeropostale in the local mall while in college. A woman brought in recently purchased panties to return. She pulled them out of the retail bag and laid them on the register counter. They were all stained with menstrual blood. I was speechless and froze. She broke the silence and said she hadn't even realized the receipt was in the bag. The receipt was stained as well. After that, I was reassigned to the back stockroom. Story 25. I worked as a supervisor in a 24-hour convenience store. One night, a coworker's mother came in drunk and threatened to slit 2 of our throats because her daughter was a poor worker who needed prompting even for the simplest daily tasks and had been reprimanded frequently. The daughter quit the following day, and her mother was permanently banned from the store. Story 26. I was a manager of the Toys R Us electronics section. So many crazy stories. Off the top of my head. 1. At the end of the night, I had to print the console count. How many we had at the start of the day, how many sold, and how many remained. The list included video game consoles, tablets, iPads and iPods, and cameras. I would do my count, call over the storefront manager to double-check, and then the storefront manager would unlock the electronics closet to finish the count. The closet had at least 2 security cameras, and you had to be watched while there. We were hemorrhaging Nintendo 3DS and Apple products. My report would read, Day started with 37 Nintendo 3DS, 0 sold today, 22 remaining. Only the storefront manager and the store manager had the key to the electronics closet. It turned out the store manager would turn off the cameras, sneak into the closet, and stuff his jacket. He was escorted out by the police and I never saw him again. 2. On Black Friday, two new hires worked the front counter together. With every purchase, they would ring a $5 gift card and pocket it. They were escorted out by the police around 4 a.m. My manager said it was over $1,000 each in gift cards. 3. A group of men walked to the sports section, pulled several basketballs out of their packaging, and ran out at full speed holding as many as they could. I have more. Story 27. Everyone here is sharing stories about rude or disruptive customers, so I will do the opposite. I liked working in retail because, despite the impossible customers, the cordial ones made it worthwhile. Once at Home Depot, a couple of older men came in. When I asked how I could help them, they gasped dramatically and said nothing was the same now that I had called them that awful word. I followed up, apologizing. "Oh, I'm sorry. How can I help you, motherfuckers?" We laughed and had a blast during the 40 seconds it took to help them. Story 28. Oh my God. Some of these are so terrible. Mine was not as bad, but it was gross and completely baffling. I worked in a store with display beds. I think there were 5. People let their kids play on them, so I had to remake them every night after closing. At least once a week, I would find a worn pair of women's underwear. The beds were in the middle of the store, visible in the crowded, brightly lit space. I could never figure out how or why anyone would leave underwear there. It would only take a minute to stuff them under the covers. But why? I was supposed to put them in lost and found, but I always threw them away instead. Story 29. I worked in a garden center for a few years. A woman came in once a year and spent hundreds on plants and plant accessories. She always refused the free delivery, so I had to fit all those items into her Fiat 500. The boot was loaded with compost and the rest of the car looked like a plant pot on wheels. Took nearly an hour each time. It would have been much simpler and safer for her to use the free delivery. Story 30. I worked at a Borders bookstore in downtown Washington, District of Columbia at 18th and L Streets. I was at the information desk during the rollout of a proprietary e-reader and was wearing an e-reader certified badge. An older woman came up to ask a question, saw the badge, stopped mid-sentence and said, "Oh, how nice. You can read." She then turned and left the store. My manager and I cracked up. Story 31. I worked in a major high-fidelity retailer in television and stereo sales. An older customer came in with her daughter and bought a cheap television and digital versatile disc player combo. She haggled as hard as she could, and to get rid of her, I gave her a very good deal. I probably made about $3 in commission on the item. She then harassed me and other staff for months, claiming that the digital versatile disc player built into the television was scratching her discs. She demanded that we replace all her discs and give her a brand new television. She brought in a few discs as proof, and it was clear she had scratched them herself. The scratches were very deep. After much deliberation, we replaced the television, but only on one condition. I had to go to her house and install it for her. Felt like something out of a horror movie. She lived in the worst house on a nice street. It was filled with trash and stuffed animals. I felt terrified and rushed the installation, so I am pretty sure I did not do it correctly. A month later, I was transferred to another store, and thankfully a friend of mine took my place. When she came back looking for me, he told her I had quit and no longer worked for the company. She then demanded my phone number. That was 12 years ago, and I still feel unsettled thinking about it. Story 32. I worked at a sports store. A woman came in looking for black Nike shoes with the white swoosh. She would not give any other details, such as where she had seen them or what the person was doing while wearing them. She insisted I knew what she meant. I showed her our wall and said that most Nike shoes come in black and white and that the best I could do was show her the shoes we had available. Story 33. I worked at PetSmart in high school, and a woman came through my register with a bunch of fish. I was an aquarium-loving nerdy teenager, so I started asking her about the fish, why she chose that type, what her setup was, and so on. She said she had to replace her entire tank because her teenage son had hosted a party over the weekend. The boys were taking tequila shots and were swallowing the fish from her tank hole. Story 34. I worked as a cashier at a big box store in high school, ringing up items at the register closest to the door. I heard a commotion and turned to see a man covered in blood pushing a shopping cart with a television and a crock pot as he ran toward the exit. Our asset protection officer gave chase and tackled him at the front door. They fought, and the man's arm was bleeding all over the floor right at the store exit. The television he was stealing was a display model on the top shelf. He had sliced his arm on the metal shelving while pulling it down. Security restrained him. A customer went over, struck the thief with her purse, and yelled at him. The police were called and arrested him. The blood spill meant we had to call professional hazardous materials cleaners. They cleaned while the store remained open for business, which was ironic. Everyone who came into contact with blood had to have blood tests to ensure they had not contracted anything. It was a memorable day. Story 35. On my first, early shift, a drunk man in a unicorn suit defecated and vomited on the floor while trying to buy more vodka. Unforgettable. Story 36. While I was going to college in the 1980s, I worked the 3 to midnight closing shift at a stop and rob. The store was located at the off-ramp intersection. The store was set up with the cash register by the intersection and 10 gas pumps along the access road. One night around 11:30, I noticed a van come under the highway and then slowly drive the length of the store, the driver giving me a hard look. Thinking I was about to get robbed, I quickly made a drop to keep the cash register at or below $20. The van pulled all the way to the far end of the parking lot and stopped just before it left the driveway. I watched more out of curiosity than worry. I saw the overhead light come on through the driver's window, then a young woman come around from the back of the van. She then commenced to do a heel-to-toe walk down the driveway, like a field sobriety test for driving while intoxicated. She was wearing only her birthday suit and had a very red face. She came into the store, walked to the cooler, got a 6-pack of Coors Light, and came to the counter to pay for it. She set the beer on the counter and handed me a $5 bill and her driver's license. The drinking age was 18 and the beer cost about $3.50, if I recall correctly. She stuttered something about a sorority initiation while I was ringing her up. I asked what college since I was bagging her beer, and she told me. Unfortunately, it was not the same college I was attending. I handed her the change and her license, which she promptly dropped into the sack with the beer, and she walked back across the parking lot on a heel-to-toe gait. She got into the van and they left. There were no surveillance cameras back then, but I do have a story to tell. Story 37. About 10 years ago, I worked in a middle-class British supermarket chain. It was a Saturday morning shift, not overly busy but with steady footfall. Our chilled dairy section was opposite the tills when I heard raised voices. An elderly woman, about 70, had collapsed face first into the cheese chiller, lying in a mix of butter and non-dairy spreads. It was serious. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation was being given by bystanders and staff. I was only 17 or 18 at the time and did not get involved directly. I kept other customers from rubbernecking so the woman could have some dignity. A middle-aged woman behind me let out a large, disapproving huff. Think middle-class Karen. Hair in a bun, designer leather jacket, designer bag, designer boots, and a face altered by filler and Botox. In a quintessentially entitled tone, I explained that there was a medical emergency and that the aisle was closed. She huffed again, impatient, and said in a condescending voice that she did not have all day and to go and get her items, as if I were her servant. I politely told her I could not because the products she wanted were where the elderly woman had collapsed. Without hesitation, she pushed me out of the way with her trolley, forced past another member of staff, parked her trolley next to the woman receiving cardiopulmonary resuscitation, reached over the woman and the staff, grabbed 2 blocks of cheese, put them in her trolley, and walked off as if nothing was happening. I was speechless at how cold people could be. Retail. Never again. Story 38. While working at Home Depot one night, a man who appeared to be under the influence entered the store. He wandered for a while and eventually took a 50-pack of Alpha utility knife blades from the hardware department. He brought the blades to a shower display, closed himself inside, and began removing them one by one, attempting to put them into his pants pockets to steal them. The razor-sharp blades cut his hands and legs badly, and he was dripping blood inside the shower stall. We called emergency services, but before the ambulance arrived, he had already left the store with most of the blades in his pockets, leaving a trail of blood from the shower stall to the parking lot. He did not speak or show any sign of pain. Emergency medical personnel intercepted him in the parking lot. We cordoned off the area and hired professional cleaners to deal with the biohazardous material. Story 39. On my first shift at the grocery store where I worked, a man wanted to buy potatoes, and the sign said 1 kilogram for $1. This absolute dumbass took 2 to 3 kilograms and had the nerve to get angry at me when the potatoes did not cost $1. The floor manager had to come out and explain very condescendingly how prices work to that asshole old man. Story 40. Back in the late 1990s, I was a cashier at a big box store. An elderly regular was a menace. I rang up her purchases, and she refused to write a check until I balanced her checkbook. I quickly balanced it and got her out of my line. About 15 years later, I was shopping and heard a customer screaming at a cashier because she had forgotten her debit card personal identification number and blamed the cashier. As I passed, I realized it was the same woman, still being a nuisance to everyone. Story 41. I worked at Walmart. The first special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children order I ever handled had 8 cans of tuna. This was when the program was still on a check form, so you had to fill it all at one time. The woman with the check had 9 cans of tuna. When I explained that she had one too many cans, I told her the extra item would not go through on her check and she would be responsible for the cost. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "No, for plus 4 is 9. Use your fingers." I was stunned. Story 42. I worked at Barnes & Noble. 2 rowdy young men wearing my old high school lacrosse uniforms came in. They were talking loudly and laughing. They went to the bathroom. About a minute later, I went in and heard wet, lotion-like sounds coming from a stall. The 2 men were in one stall, aggressively masturbating each other and making loud noises. 5 minutes later, they left, still talking and laughing. Story 43. I was told to check the bathroom. The floor, walls, and all surfaces were covered in purple vomit. Then my coworker mixed bleach and ammonia. Story 44. I was pushing carts and bagging groceries at Kroger in 2006. One afternoon, as I was clearing carts from the lot, I was interrupted by the most horrific screams I have ever heard. They were not like superficial movie screams. They were guttural and blood-curdling. A woman had come out of the store to a dead battery and asked someone to give her a jump. Since the parking spot directly in front of her van was empty, the other person pulled in so their car was nose to nose with her van. They hopped out to help with the cables. Once they had them connected, the 2 people remained standing between the vehicles while the woman got back into her car to try to start the engine. Somehow the battery in the van had died while the car was still in drive, and when she tried to start the engine, the van moved forward and crushed the legs of the person who had been standing between the vehicles helping her. They left in an ambulance. I never heard anything more. I hope they recovered because it was a really messed up situation. Story 45. Context. I am doing door-to-door sales for a telecom company. I was having a great week in a rural area of northeastern Canada. I reached a house where a man was standing in his driveway talking to another man. I approached them and said I did not want to interrupt. I just wanted to give him my business card and let him know that I was in the area talking to his neighbors about their home internet and cable. He took my card, threw it on the ground, and said, as rudely as possible, that he worked for my competitor and was not interested. I shook it off and thought nothing of it. I continued selling to some of his neighbors down the street and was having a good night on the road. At 9 o'clock in the evening, I was getting ready to go back to my hotel and enter my sales when my phone rang. It was the man who had been rude earlier. He asked if I had eaten yet. I replied that I had not. I was just getting ready to pick up some food and head back to the hotel. He answered that I should not worry about it and that I would come over to his place for supper and that we would talk business. I agreed. I was just down the road from him, so I arrived shortly and he greeted me in the driveway. He said his wife was just grabbing some pizza and asked if I wanted to come have a smoke in the garage while we waited. I agreed and we went into the garage. He asked if I smoked. At the time I smoked a lot of weed, so I said yes. He pulled out a very large joint and we smoked it. Then he went into a back room in the garage and pulled out an enormous pipe. He put the biggest crack rock I had ever seen in the pipe and asked if I wanted some. I politely declined, and he proceeded to smoke the crack until it was gone. For more context, the man had a huge, beautiful home. The garage could have fit a full-size Peterbilt. His wife drove a Jaguar, and he had a fully outfitted Ford F-250 Super Duty diesel truck. That was the last thing I expected. We finished up, his wife arrived, we had pizza, we talked business, and I ended up closing the sale. It was about 10 o'clock, and I thought I should get back to my hotel and get some sleep because it would be a big day tomorrow. He asked if I wanted to go back to the garage. It was really good weed, so I agreed and we went back to the garage. He pulled out a joint for me and then smoked another large crack rock. My boss was in the area as well. I called him and told him the whole story. The customer had a large manor in the front of his yard with the whole kit and caboodle. So from that day on we dubbed the story Crack Jesus. Story 46. I used to work at an Apple store. I got an appointment with someone who had forgotten passwords and needed help with their account. I met him. He was a greasy-looking anime fan, nothing out of the ordinary. He handed me a notebook full of smudged red ink and said it was his password notebook. I looked at it and all the writing was smudged and illegible. I asked him casually why it was all smudged, and he said, "I wrote it with my blood." Story 47. A woman berated me for 5 minutes about why I was working on Christmas Day. I finally said, "Because of people like you who cannot plan ahead." She abruptly left. I did not tell my manager for a year, and I never heard about a complaint. Story 48. I was working the cash register at a card shop. 3 kids, each about 15 years old, walked in and each bought a booster pack. The last one paid with cash but was about 25 cents short. He let out a disgusted sigh and asked, "Can I have a quarter?" I was confused and told him no. We then had a long conversation about how he needed the quarter to pay for the booster pack. I told him that is not how a store works. He finally sighed and said, "Fine, I'll just use my store credit." He fought with me over a quarter for 3 minutes when he had $20 in store credit the whole time. He bought his booster pack, opened it, and dropped the wrapper on the floor in front of me. Story 49. I worked for a major cellular company far longer than I should have. The number of difficult customers I dealt with daily is something the average person could not comprehend. People came in angry that we had suspended their phone service even though the bill had not been paid for months. They were upset that we would not replace a phone they lost or broke for free. Many customers threatened physical violence because I did not know the passwords for their applications, bank accounts, miscellaneous logins, or company servers. I had one particular man who insisted his phone was hacked and would not accept any explanation that it was not. I told him he needed to swap his subscriber identity module card every 3,000 minutes to keep it secure. It got him out of the store, but he returned every few months to have it changed. Story 50. I worked at Walmart for over a decade. 3 memorable stories. 1. I worked nights and was stacking food onto a cart to stock the shelves. A man asked my name. I told him because it was visible on my name tag and I was not thinking. He asked if I wanted him to be my man. I said no because I had a partner. He said he had a partner too and that he would take care of both of us. I said no thanks and went back to work. 3 days later, an angry woman came looking for me by name because she thought I had hit on her partner. I did not wear my name badge for about 3 years after that. 2. The power went out in that section of town. We raided the sporting goods department for headlamps and flashlights and continued stocking anyway. The store manager called someone by the wrong name that night and nearly had a box cutter used on him. 3. Lawn mowers were stacked too high in the garden center and were touching the overhead heaters. They smoldered until they caught fire. We noticed during our lunch break and had an extended lunch while the fire department extinguished the flames. Story 51. I worked in receiving for Sears in 2008. One night a woman came to pick up a grill she had bought and had assembled at the store. It was a liability for us to tie a purchase down for a customer, but we could offer twine so they could do it themselves. She backed up to the loading dock. I loaded the grill into her truck bed and insisted on giving her twine to tie it down. She said it would be fine because she did not live far away. I thought I had done my job. The next morning, a manager ran through the back looking for me, shouting, "Where is he? Is he here yet?" She found me and yelled, "Did you load a grill last night? Why did you not tie it down?" I told her yes, I had loaded a grill, and no, I did not tie it down because we are not allowed to, but I had offered the customer twine and they had refused. The manager was angry. She said the grill had fallen off the back of the truck on the highway and shattered. Story 52. Long ago, I worked at a music store. People often called and asked if we had that song by that guy. If we were extra lucky, they would hum or sing a few bars over the phone. That job also gave us moments when someone walked right up to my teenage self and asked if we had the song Fuckin' in the Butt. It is a real song by David Allan Coe, if I remember correctly, so he was not trying to be gross. Story 53. The assistant manager began an affair with another female employee. He has a wife who works at a different location. When the wife discovered the affair, she drove her large pickup truck over his sports car in the parking lot. Story 54. I was the senior sales guy at Babbage's, the store that later became GameStop. We had a generous return policy. Any games, accessories, anything but Pokemon cards could be returned opened for up to 2 weeks after purchase. A man shows up with a PlayStation fishing controller. He bought it 17 days earlier. I explain I can't process the return because it's outside the return window, but if he comes back that afternoon when the manager is here, the manager is a reasonable guy and will probably return it. That is not good enough for the customer. He wants me to open the register and give him cash. He wants me to let him take merchandise equal to the value of the controller. He accuses me, saying I won't return it because the customer is black, because I am a coward, and because I wish slavery still existed. He berates me, curses at me, and belittles me for almost 2 hours. He leaves and brings the manager from KB Toys, who is a friend, and they come down and scream at me together. The two leave about 10 minutes before my manager arrives. They come back hours later, and knowing the story, my manager refuses the return. Story 55. I used to work at a Canadian engagement ring store. Think the worst radio ads ever. A woman and her fiancé came in and her ring was mangled. They told us an amazing story about how she slammed her hand in a car door and the ring was the only thing that kept her finger from breaking. We repaired the ring for free and even gave her an updated band. She came in a week later on her own to pick up the new ring. I said, "Wow, it's amazing the ring saved your finger." She replied completely deadpan, "Yeah, I lied. I hated the design my fiancé picked out, so I smashed that thing with a hammer." Story 56. I used to work for Chesapeake Knife and Tool. We sold a cheap $158 katana at a time when mall ninja stores started popping up in the late 1980s. It was a popular item. At our Baltimore location during the height of the Christmas season, a man came in and paid cash, which the district manager emphasized was important. When the cashier asked if he wanted us to hold it so he could do his Christmas shopping and come back for it, he said, "No, I'll just use it here." He then ran himself through with the sword. The cashier screamed and the entire store emptied in a panic. He dropped to his knees and looked confused, as if he expected something to happen. The district manager called emergency services, and he was still conscious when the emergency medical technicians arrived. After assessing the situation, they clipped the tip and hilt of the sword off, wrapped him up, and took him away. Weeks later, the man sent us a letter apologizing for his behavior, saying his girlfriend had left him. Somehow he missed every vital organ and suffered only muscular and intestinal damage. He was under psychiatric care, and his therapist insisted he write the letter. There were a lot of weird stories from that job. Story 57. I worked in the automotive department at Walmart. One day the phone rang and the department manager answered. She was confused and handed the phone to me. The caller asked how much for a rim job. I laughed and then hung up. The department manager was still perplexed, so I explained what a rim job is. Story 58. My son works at a truck stop. They only ever have one person working at a time. A couple of weeks ago, he had a human trafficking and overdose incident in the parking lot. As he was outside on the phone with 911 trying to deal with it, a line formed inside the store. He was screamed at for not being at the register. Last night, my husband and I went to that truck stop to get gas and say hello. The police officers were arriving at about the same time. Apparently, there had been a hit and run. He went outside to meet the officers and they greeted him by his first name. We went inside and I asked how often this happens. He said, "Mom, I am on a first-name basis with the police officers. What do you think?" He really should write down all the things he has seen. It is truly nuts. Story 59. I worked at a pet store. An older woman came in with her dog and asked me about dog food. While we were talking, the dog suddenly squatted and defecated right behind her. After we finished, she began to walk away, saying she had never done that before and did not return to clean it up. Story 60. I was working the register at around 11 o'clock in the evening when an intoxicated woman in a sundress came through my lane and asked where the restroom was. As I pointed it out, she said, "Never mind," and walked away. There was a puddle of urine on the floor. Story 61. My coworker processed a refund for Lego, but the bags contained rocks. Story 62. I worked at a cell phone store many years ago. I was selling a woman a cell phone and explaining everything, including the home charger. She stopped me and said the charger would not work. I asked what she meant. She said it would not work because she had an apartment, not a home. I could not believe it. Story 63. I live in Canada and used to work in the produce department at the local Loblaws grocery store in my town. I have a few stories and I will make a short list. A coworker burst his eardrums after filling a 2-liter bottle with dry ice from the ice cream shipment and water. He sealed the cap and left it in the produce cooler. He stood right beside it when it exploded. The cashiers up front thought someone had dropped a pallet in the back. The cooler was very soundproof. A sparrow got in and was stuck in the store for 2 years. It got very fat and had to circle to get up to its nest in the rafters. The assistant manager got a bunch of the younger staff with ball-bearing pellet guns to stay after hours to shoot it. They never did. 8 cashiers were fired and taken to jail for theft. They were running a scam by rescanning coupons called Superbucks that the gas station in the parking lot printed. Customers used them, but they could be rescanned indefinitely. They were caught after some televisions in the system had been paid for entirely with Superbucks. An older woman in the deli cut her leg when the sheath for her paring knife, which her husband had made for her, broke. Her coworker screamed over the intercom for the assistant manager. She nicked an artery, so the emergency response was warranted. The store manager was one of the worst people I have ever met. A new cashier was hired. She was about 17 and had just found out she was pregnant. She had really bad morning sickness on her 3rd shift. She was vomiting loudly in the bathroom next to the break room and the manager's office, so we both heard it. She asked to go home early, and the manager told her that if she was not back in 30 minutes with a doctor's note, she should not bother coming back at all. She ran out crying and never came back. A few years later, after I was thankfully let go, that manager was taken from the store in handcuffs for financial fraud. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.